Hello everyone and welcome back to MixBuzz TV mixing and mastering tutorials on YouTube. By popular demand, here we are with the first follow-up video to our analyzing Adele's vocal video. Link here and in the info box down below if you missed it. But before we start, I want to introduce you to a cool site called ratethemix.com. Link in the info box down below, a community where you can enter mixing competitions, get feedback on your work from other mixers and professionals, and last but not least, you can win stuff in the process. For example, this month, April 2016, there's a prize bundle worth $1,500, which ain't bad. The competition starts on April 10th, 2016. Entries must be submitted by April 20th. If you're interested, you'll find all the details on the site. I'll put the link in the info box down below. So we ratethemix.com, you get to practice mixing. Every month you get access to a new song to mix, all from different artists and genres, and you can win stuff by entering the mixing contest, so check it out. But let's get to our video. All of you guys wanted me to talk about how to find the resonances and solve common problems when mixing vocals, and while I've always known this was a subject that many of you are interested in, the main reason because I've never done one before is that I don't, unlike other channels, want to bullshit you. I try only to release video tutorials and tips that I know for a fact will actually help you. I don't want to use catchy titles to have you guys click on the video only to find the necessary complicated ways to do something simple just to get views. It's not my style. So the problem in making a video on how to spot resonances and solve EQ problems on instruments and specifically on vocals is that it's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to give you guidelines that apply to most situations because every vocal is different and every mix is different. I know it sucks to hear, but that's the truth. Every time we pretty much start from scratch and work our ass off to make things sit right in a mix. No magic plugin, no magic preset, our ears and skills is what works. It gets easier with time and experience, that's the good news. With that very important disclaimer out of the way, let's try to make something useful out of this video. This is not meant to give you hard and fast rules, nothing written in stone, but just a guideline. Something that's gonna help you in recognizing and treat problems. Just suggestions and, most important, my personal way of doing things, my train of thought when working on vocals. So if it works, good. If not, leave it. It's not gospel. We'll talk mostly about vocals, but we'll try to touch other instruments as well, like bass and acoustic guitar. If not in this video, in another follow-up. So why vocals are so difficult? Well, first of all, because it's the most important element in a mix. So if that's off, everything's off. But mostly because vocals are a very complex material, rich harmonic content, and think about it. We as human beings are listening to human voices all day, every day for our entire lives. So when vocals sound unnatural, it immediately jumps at us. It's obvious. This doesn't apply to effects as those are, well, effects, and we perceive them as such. I'm talking about EQ mostly here, and flutter echoes and phase shifts that cause random frequency cancellations. Those are what sounds weird to us. So let's try to list some of the most common problems you find on a vocal tracks, and let's start by introducing a concept that we will see in this video a lot. Frequency by time. And by frequency by time, I mean some problem frequencies are static and can be treated with a static EQ, a cut, a boost, filter. But most problems on vocals are not static. They pop up here and there on esses, plosives, maybe when a singer hits a certain note, a certain vowel, or a certain frequency range gets nasty, especially on female singers, is pretty common when they belt the high, mid-high range gets nasty. So these problems can't be treated with static moves. You need either automation or dynamic processors like multiband compressor and or dynamic EQs, often all of them combined. So let's go from bottom end to high frequency range and let's see these common problems. Bottom end is fairly easy. Usually you want to high pass some sub information. that, yes, we don't usually need on vocals. Be gentle, don't annihilate it. The steeper the slope of your high-pass filter, the more artifact will create. So try using a shelf instead. Sometimes it's way more transparent. Again, you don't hear the low end, and we don't need the low end on vocals, but we feel it. So don't use a guillotine approach to high-pass filtering. We talked about this in past videos. How high you're gonna set the corner frequency, well, I can't tell you that. Every vocal is different. It depends on the songs, the microphone, the arrangement, and so on. Let's just say that for the most part, a corner frequency anywhere from 40 to even 120 sometimes is possible. But try to position the microphone so that you have to cut the bare minimum. Think proximity effect. Set the right distance to the singer from the mic to adjust the bass content. Also try different highs and angles for the mic. Straight up, super close against the singer mouth is rarely the best place, okay? This is a static problem that you can solve with either a high-pass filter, as we said, a shelf filter, or a bell by cutting. In the bottom end, we also find the first dynamic problem, which is plosives. B's and P's, the blast of air hitting the mic capsule causes them, but only when they actually happen. So this is not a static problem, and the frequency where these happen can be higher than where you set your HPF or other low rumble filters. And here's the first thing that you need to watch out for. Sometimes your first filter is enough to remove also the plosives, but some other times if you try to remove the plosives with an HPF, you end up cutting too high. And since this is usually the first thing you do on vocals, you're already in trouble. The solution here is a dynamic processor. Generally, I prefer dynamic EQs to multiband compressors because the first one is much more like automation as opposed to the multiband compressor that can cause static phase cancellations and comp filtering by splitting the material in X number of bands. That's just the nature of multiband compression. Fortunately, we have tools like FabFilter ProMB with its dynamic phase, which is pretty awesome. And what it does, it only splits the band with filters when it's actually applying compression, leaving the material alone when it's not working. But anyways, here we set up our processor to attenuate the plosives when they happen. This way we don't cut the balls and remove all the power out of our vocals, but we control what it needs to be controlled at the time that it needs to be controlled. Again, dynamic EQs or multiband compressors are the tools to use here, but if you only have few episodes of plosives, the best way is always simple level automation. Less processing is almost always the better choice. So in that case, you simply go where the plosive happens and lower the volume. It's that simple. Going up in the frequency range, we have the low mids, the evil range. Well, no, it's not. There's no evil range. If you remove too much of this, you end up with thin sounding vocals. Here is where the body is. But too much of this and you end up with mud and muffled vocals. So it's tricky. And this range is tricky because the problems can be both static and dynamic. If it's a static, is either the mic's fault or more likely the room you recorded in. Small, not treated rooms tend to have resonances in this range, in the low-mid range. And how do you spot them? Well, what you know is that you have to grab a bell on your EQ, narrow it, and sweep around, right? Well, kind of. If you do this and you're not an experienced mixing engineer, here is where you start to get confused because everything will start to resonate if you boost it too much with a very narrow bell. And it's gonna be hard to spot what is actually a resonance and what is actually needed for the vocal to sound natural. This is why sometimes people end up with 15 cuts in the frequency range, and when they play the vocals in the mix, it sounds like shit. So what do? You go back to what I said at the beginning. Frequency by time. Doesn't mean it's easy, but try to follow me. You grab your narrow bell, not too narrow, and you boost, but not too much. and you do a sweep around, but what you're looking for is a frequency that stays at pretty much the same level, no matter what note the singer is hitting. We say this resonance will ring. It regenerates. Hard to describe, really. If a given frequency is always there, steady in level and energy, that's when you know you probably spot a problem due to the room acoustic. The solution, static EQ. Attenuate it, don't annihilate it. Although the cuts here could be really narrow and deep, so just do what you need to do. If instead the problem is due to the singer or how the mic reacts to him or her, you will hear in this range a note that increases in energy a lot more than it should when the singer hits a certain note. A frequency analyzer can help here, but don't mix with your eyes. Always listen first and use the analyzer to spot where exactly you need to cut. For this, EQs with a note frequency display like FabFilter Pro Q or Waves H EQ are very useful in this case to precisely nail the corner frequency to attenuate by going by note instead of frequency. I usually use the keyboard, the note frequency function, to find precisely the note to set my dynamic EQs, because there's no dynamic EQs that has the MIDI keyboard, the note frequency keyboard display. So I grab FabFilter Pro Q or Waves H EQ. I find with the note the exact frequency that I need to work on, and then I set my dynamic EQs exactly at that frequency. I'm a control freak, so I do that. This problem, the one note that goes up in energy that resonates, is more common with instruments like bass and guitars, because every instrument does resonate more at a certain frequency. They vibrate more. It's just the nature of the instrument. On bass and acoustic guitars is usually around 110 for bass and 220 for the guitar. If you look at the note frequency, you'll see that's the frequency for the A note. It's not a rule, just a common trend. Usually these instruments tend to resonate more when they hit the A note. Again, not a rule, just a common trend, and usually those two ranges, 110 and 220, are where there's gonna be a build-up due to other instruments also hitting that range hard in the mix. In this case, you need either automation if you have few episodes only, or dynamic EQ/multiband compressor to treat the offending note and frequency. Going up, we have the mids. On vocals, this is the most important range, as human hearing is most sensitive to this range. So moves of even few dBs are really obvious. So try to be conservative here. In this range, the same applies for what we said about the low mids. Look for both static and dynamic problems by sweeping, but be conservative if you can with cuts and boost. And here I want to introduce you another concept. In this area, try to shift the energy as opposed to only add or remove it. For example, female vocals too harsh at 2K. Good. Try removing 3 or 4 dBs there and give 1.5 dBs somewhere else according to what you missed by cutting at 2K. If the vocals start to sound dull, try higher, 4, 6K, or if the vocals starts not to be intelligible, try 1K or somewhere higher. You get the idea. Shift the energy if it's possible. Also, another tip to spot the offending frequency: instead of using a full parametric EQ, try using a classic EQ emulation. Not for the color, not because they are cool, but because classic board EQs like API or Neve have pre-selected limited frequency choices, and there's a reason because they selected those frequencies. They usually work. So try using those kind of EQs first to spot a resonance or a problem, but also to find good frequencies, the ones where your vocals or other track lives, and then switch to a parametric if you need something more precise. Mostly I prefer full parametrics for cutting and broadband classic EQs for boosting, like everyone else. But still, even for cutting, they work very well, especially the 4 bands, Neve and API, and of course SSL. Unfortunately, I can only tell you to try. You'll have to find the best way yourself according to the song to find actually what frequencies you need to remove and what frequency you need to feature. Sometimes just boosting the high mids masks the problems on the low mids. Sometimes just using a low pass filter or cutting some of the really high frequency make the vocal warmer and adds body. You never know. One important thing that you have to do is to level match when you EQ, because the very first thing that tricks our brain every single time is this: louder is better and brighter is better. So in the first seconds, if you boost anything, let's say above 500 hertz, that will apparently sound better. But that's not always the case. Always listen to your EQ moves both in solo, but most important against the track, the rest of the mix, and the reference. And if you have effects, I would say leave yourself room to change your EQ when you add the effects to the vocal. Effects will massively change the way we hear the vocals, we perceive the vocals, especially time-based effects like reverbs, rooms, delays. So leave yourself room for when you add effects to change your EQ if needed. But let's keep going on with the frequency range, and then we have the dreaded high end. Here is where we usually have harshness, esses, hard consonants. And here again, the problems can be static or dynamic. Usually both. S's and hard consonants are events, resonances due to the microphone and the room are static. First, we take care of the static problems. Is always easier. Finding a piercing frequency is fairly easy as we are most sensitive to this area. Of course, if you don't have a good monitoring system and room, one that you can trust, everything I said in this video is useless for you, but that was assumed. By removing the annoying frequency in the high range, things simply sound better, and your ear relaxes as opposed to fatigue easily when listening to the vocal. This is a telltale sign. Usually anywhere between 6K and 16K, and keep in mind, as we've seen in the Adele vocal video, most likely is gonna be more than one static frequency that is annoying and harsh. The EQ cuts in this range will make your vocal smooth. Before sending it to a compressor, before saturating, before adding effects, this is the range that more than any other is responsible for making your vocal either aggressive or annoying, edgy or smooth. Compressing before taking care of this range and the problems in the high frequency range means fighting an uphill battle that you're probably going to lose anyway, because the compressor will most likely become speedy, no matter which one. So remove or attenuate the piercing frequencies first, as many as it takes, with cuts as deep as is needed. One very important thing though, bad sounding microphones can't be fixed with EQ. Period. Get over it. And by bad sounding microphones, I don't necessarily mean cheap microphones. Sometimes a 5K mic is the wrong mic for a vocal, and that's gonna sound bad. So always try to pick a mic that sounds good, that goes along with a given singer to begin with, because bad mics, bad vocal technique, and bad rooms can only be fixed that much with EQ and automation. There is a reason, because we own dozens of mics, variety, options. Every vocals is different. Anyway, once you took care of the static problems in the high frequency range, we move again to the events like S's and hard consonants. Automation is always the most natural sounding solution here, but de-essers like Massey, FabFilter, Sonox, DMG, Waves are great, and you can use them with success. Multiple de-essers are not uncommon. Actually, I do prefer using more than one, usually up to 5 or 6 at the end of a mix, between leads, doubles, and vocal bus. And effects too. I put de-essers on my effects, on my vocals effects a lot. And I like to give each one usually a specific frequency to work on, and for example, put one before a static EQ, one after, one before or after compression, it depends. Esses change as you change static EQ, add saturation and compression, so use as many as you need before and or after a certain processor, because esses will change due to distortion, phase shift, and compression dynamics in general. Just don't go overboard with one, is my advice. Multiple de-essers doing little work each is what I find more natural sounding, as opposed to one moving heavy weights on its own. I also have a hardware de-esser which I adore, but that's another story. Plug-in de-essers are just fine. So get up close and personal with them. Master the use of de-essers is very important. Lastly, we have the very high frequency range, what we call air. I'd say from 10K up to 20K and even beyond our hearing capabilities. It's common to find boosts at corner frequencies like 28K or 40K on some very popular EQs. But we'll talk about that another time. Here is where I see most people failing. This range. I have a video on low-pass filter and high-end content in tracks that, while popular enough, it didn't get the attention I was hoping for. And this is a good time to link it because I think it's an extremely important subject. While I'm mad at the HPF filter madness, as you well know, I made that video on excessive high-frequency energy in mixes because I strongly believe that many problems people have with harsh mixes can be solved with a simple low-pass filter. I won't repeat what's in that video. Really go watch it if you haven't. But in short, the point is we don't have tape as media anymore. A media that naturally cut high-end from the hundreds of tracks that we record. And so, as we said, brighter appears better. People are afraid to cut the high end because they get used to all this high end, especially on vocals, when half of the problems with harshness could be solved with that, with a simple low-pass filter. Not only they are afraid to cut, but they usually boost too much and too high to try to make the vocals clear and airy. The clarity of a vocal is, for the most part, in the mids and high mids, not really in the super high end. You only need a little bit of that air at 20 or 28K, and not even for every genre. And again, let's bring back the concept of shifting the energy. Think Pultec style, push-pull. Limit the bandwidth with the LPF, and then gently boost a pleasant range in that air area. Can be 10K, can be 20K, can be 40K. As usual, you'll need to decide case by case. Wider cues or shelves are preferred here, as high frequency boosts don't go well with narrow bells. Cuts, yes. Boosts, not so much. So I think this is it for this video. I hope it was useful somehow. As I said before, this didn't want to be a list of rules, just a guideline, just my way of doing things and rationalize what in reality is really hard to rationalize when you mix, because you go by guts for the most part. But I hope it helped somehow. And if you have any question, write it down in the comment down below or on our Facebook and Twitter page. So, as usual, if you liked this video, please don't forget to click the like button, join us on Facebook and Twitter to be up to date with the new uploads and all the news about the channel. In the meantime, please keep supporting MixBuzz TV by sharing the videos on social media, groups, forums, blogs, personal pages. Subscribe if you haven't already, and see you next time.